Thank you for joining us for another installment of HAC TV, where we'll be discussing law and DV and the implications and protections surrounding domestic violence. Tonight, we'll be speaking with Rita Pierre, Esquire, who is an attorney licensed in New York and New Jersey. She's the host of Frida's World podcast and According to RP on WJMS Radio. Rita, good evening. I'm well. How are you? Sorry. Rita,
How are you?
I'm well. Sorry about that technical
It's okay.
difficulties.
It's okay.
How's everything going?
Everything's going okay, despite what's going on outside. We're striving.
Yeah, not only are we dealing with a pandemic in the medical world, we're dealing in the racial pandemic.
Yep.
So that is a struggle to deal with.
Yeah.
Hopefully you and your family are well. So tell us a little more about yourself.
Well, as you already stated to the public here, my name is Rita Pierre. I am a licensed attorney in both New York and New Jersey. I started off my legal career working at the district attorney's office in Brooklyn. I started off as a domestic violence and elder abuse prosecutor. Then I went on to general trial zone. After that, I left and I went on to work at SEIU Local 32BJ, which is one of the largest labor unions in the country. And I was representing labor union members who, were terminated wrongfully, or if there was a contract violation committed, against them by the employer. I sought to rectify that. So we did cases not just in New York, New Jersey, but in Miami, DC, so Connecticut. So that was a great experience. After working there for several years, I recently transitioned to do labor law on management side, working for a hotel hospitality company, dealing with, employee relations and labor relations at various hotels throughout New York City.
That's pretty amazing. And a mouthful.
A lot of stuff.
No, yeah, for sure. But we want to kind of get into your work at the DA's office and specifically surrounding domestic violence.
Yes.
So for those of us that are a little bit ignorant to the domestic violence world, what does that look like? Okay. Or what is it?
Well, domestic violence, a lot of people have their own interpretations of what domestic violence can be, right? But essentially, domestic violence is a pattern of behaviors used by a partner to maintain power and control over another person, right? And this individual is an intimate, in an intimate relationship. It doesn't have to be sexual. It doesn't have to be physical abuse. It could be economic abuse. It could be emotional abuse. It can be threats. It could be intimidation. Things of that nature. And so when we're talking about intimate relationships, it can be family within a household. So we could talk about elder abuse when I was in the Elder Abuse Bureau. So that was considered a form of domestic violence as well too. Parent violence on parents, violence on children. Those things are considered domestic violence as well too. But I think in most cases, when we are talking about domestic violence, when the layperson is talking about domestic violence, they're talking about intimate partner abuse, right? Like the girlfriend, boyfriend, girlfriend, like some sort of, at some point, sexual relationship.
And I think that a lot of times, initially, that's the thought. And for me specifically, in my research, I'm coming to find that it covers an array of different areas. And so the CDC defines domestic violence as physical violence. Are there, like in the legal world, I know you said that it's also financial, as well as emotional. I don't think people really understand, and it's also familial. I don't think people have an idea of like what that is. So like with emotional, I think of it as, a boyfriend talking down on
Hmm.
a girlfriend. But could you give us some examples outside of that necessarily, whether it's familial with the elderly, as you stated before, or
Well, yeah. I mean, the thing is, I think it depends on your jurisdiction. Some jurisdictions break down the I guess the victims in different in pockets, right? So when I first started the DA's office, the Domestic Violence Bureau was with the Elder Abuse Bureau. So, primarily when we talked about domestic violence, we were dealing with, intimate partner relationships. So some type of boyfriend, girlfriend, if they had some sort of dating relationship at some point, husbands and wives, things of that nature. And then the Elder Abuse Bureau, although it was still within the Domestic Violence Bureau, those cases were treated separately. Sometimes we overlapped and we had a caseload of elder abuse cases as well too. But it was, it could be like a grandchild that was living with a grandparent that was beating the grandparent up, right? Every time Social Security money came around, would beat them up, or would or would disparage them or talk down to them, or wouldn't feed them, and different things like that, would starve them. There was uh, I can't remember the crimes against children. There was used to be a specific bureau that dealt with crimes against children, and then there was a specific bureau that dealt with just all sex crimes that were not intimate partner sex crimes. Right now, things have changed, and it's a special victims unit. And although they, I think, still have prosecutors who are specialized, it's not the same exactly as to when I started. So I think that also confused people a little bit, because everything was kind of segmented off. But when we're talking about different types of domestic violence, if we're keeping it in line with what the general public understands domestic violence to be, economic is one way. So, financially, right? You can have a partner who's never laid a hand on you, never hit you, maybe has never even talked down to you. But if they're the breadwinner in the household and they're refusing to give you money to go, get groceries, or to go, do something specific, whether it be for yourself or something even for, like, the child or something like that, withholding money from you, that in a sense is a financial abuse, right? So that financial abuse is considered domestic violence. There are many ways, you see this a lot in a lot of the Caribbean, maybe immigrant structures, where there's the one person that's working, and I'm saying person because domestic violence also happens against males as well too. It's not just females. But that individual who's in that position, that's the breadwinner in a sense, who is keeping track of all the money, and anything that you need, anything that you want, you have to go through them, and they could deny you of, it could be even money to get medication, even money to get things that are necessary for them. All of that can be considered domestic violence if it's done in a pattern, against that individual, to maintain power and control. Because that's really the focus of domestic violence, is that person is trying to maintain power and control over, the victim.
that makes it much more clear for me.
Mm-hmm.
So a question that I tend to come across is um, there's no clear definition of what a victim looks like.
Mm-hmm.
So in your opinion, what does the law consider a victim, and is there proof required to be
Okay, so
considered a?
yeah. So I mean, a victim is just that. It's a victim. It's somebody who is a victim of a crime, right? The thing is that there's no real, like, definition on, like, who's a victim, because you're not necessarily categorizing them by looks or by profession, or, like, there's no, like, identifying category. When it comes to victims of domestic violence, they can be anybody. It can be somebody who's very, very rich and affluent, and it could be somebody who is dirt poor. It can be a man, it could be a woman. You can't look at somebody and say, that's a victim of domestic violence right there. You can't. I mean, essentially, somebody is a victim of domestic violence if they're a victim of a domestic violence act. That's what makes them a victim. With respect to proof, I guess, I mean, that really depends on the circumstances of what's going on, the circumstances that led to the police being called or a complaint being drafted.
Now, it seems like you specifically emphasize Domestic Violence Act. Is
Mm-hmm.
there is there a difference between is the act the actual crime, or is there a distinction that needs to be made in that
Well,
sense?
yeah, the act is the act. So nobody's arrested for domestic violence, right? There's not like a charge that's domestic violence. Like, oh, I'm going to go beat this. People might say I'm going to go beat this domestic violence charge, but the crime is not called domestic violence. There's domestic violence acts, which can be assault, which can be battery, which can be criminal mischief, which can be harassment, which can be menacing. It can be contempt of a criminal court order or a family court order of protection. So there are different. So those acts, committed within that intimate partner like relationship or scenario is what constitutes domestic violence.
Okay. Now, and we were going to roll into the proof that is required. Is there a certain number of a situation that needs to be a threshold that needs to be reached, or a certain number of occurrences that needs to be reached for for an act to be considered domestic violence?
I mean, it's honestly really no different as like if you were to steal something from me and I call the cops and you get arrested, right? Like the same level of proof to prove your crime is essentially what would be needed in my theft case within the domestic violence world, right? So let's just say, for example, my husband and I got into like a screaming match. We were having a verbal dispute. In that verbal dispute, I went to go call 911. He grabbed the phone out of my hand, threw it on the floor, cracked it, smashed it. Phone is broken. If the police arrive at the scene, or even if they don't arrive at the scene, but if a report is then made, right? The report that's made is that, it would probably be charged with harassment, probably menacing, and then criminal mischief for the phone that was broken, right? Some people would be like, I don't understand. Like, he threw the phone on the ground. Like, why is that? Well, that's a separate charge of criminal mischief. Let's say me and you, who are not, let's say we're not related, we're not in a relationship, strangers, right? We end up in some altercation on the street and you break my phone and you smash it. That's criminal mischief as well. So the elements is what has to be proven in order for a charge to stick, in a sense. So, but when we're talking about domestic violence, what makes it tricky, I guess, when it comes to proof, is that oftentimes we have a victim, a complaining witness, as we call them, who does not want to participate in the prosecution, right? They might have called the cops, or maybe somebody who was ear hustling or somebody who heard what was happening or saw what was happening called the cops. And so when it comes time to, the victim going down to the prosecutor's office to sign the complaint, they might say, no, I don't want to move forward. So when we have a victim who doesn't want to move forward, that's essentially what can make it hard for us to move forward with whatever evidence or proof we have in the particular case, right? Because in some cases, if you don't have a victim and there's no actual like marks, there was no punches, there was no evidence to really indicate anything, that becomes really hard for us to really move forward and prove that something took place. And even if we did, and even in cases where we do have a cooperative victim, if we don't have any other witnesses, if there's no actual physical marks or any type of records that would indicate this domestic violence occurred, it ends up being a he said, she said against the victim. Yeah, victim over well, not necessarily a hearsay, because you have the victim who's saying what happened. It becomes a he said, she said, because then it's like, well, now you're asking the jury or the judge to decide who do you find to be more credible.
Yeah. Okay. Now, I know that you said, is there a specific reason you think, an underlying reason, whether it's socioeconomical or cultural, that causes the victim to not participate in specific investigations?
I mean, yeah, there's a whole slew of reasons why a victim doesn't want to move forward. I would say, for the most part, at least when I was there, most of our cases did not, we weren't able to really either move forward with them because we had uncooperative victims. We had cases that we were still able to move forward with without the victim. We call that evidence-based prosecution, where we're only going on the evidence and not the actual witness. But we had, I mean, I would say the majority of the cases were dismissed at some point because we did not have a victim who was cooperative. And the reasons for that, I mean, socioeconomic does play a big role in it, right? You're living with your spouse, or you're living with, your abuser, or whatever the case is. They're the person that, especially in New York City, things are rough. You know what I'm saying? Like, rent is high, bills are high, everybody has a roommate. At some point you might have dated this person and ended up just becoming their roommate after a while because it was
1,000%.
it was just
1,000%. Like, you over here, I'm over here. Don't worry about it. We don't not to see each other at all.
Exactly. But, cheaper to keep her or cheaper to keep him type thing, right?
Yeah,
but
1,000.
Let's say a dispute arises in there. I mean, you as the individual who might be the weaker link here, right? You don't have money to go get your own apartment. You don't have resources. You're gonna think twice. Like, I mean, he hit me that one time, or you know what, it wasn't that serious. You start making excuses, and you stay. I mean, that's that example. Then we have immigrants, right, who might be undocumented or who might have a green card or whatever the case is, and there's that threat as well too. Like, what am I supposed to do?
ICE is going to come knocking on the door.
Oh yeah.
As soon as you put in a police report.
Exactly. So there's that fear too. And then in those cases, when we're talking about immigrants, I've had cases where the husband or the wife, whoever the abuser was, would, seize passports and seize, documentation, again, power and control over this individual, right? You have people who have children with that partner, or even if they're not together, but they have children with this individual. You're thinking about the welfare of the kids. Like, is it easier for me to just stay here with the kids? I don't want to separate the kids from their father. So there's so many different reasons why people, do not want to be cooperative, because when we're talking about an arrest for domestic violence, at least in Brooklyn, and I would say probably most of the boroughs, an order of protection is 9 times out of 10, or 99.99 times out of 10 issues, a temporary order of protection, which is usually a full stay away. So the abuser, whoever the order of protection is against, cannot come to the premises, right? They cannot interact or engage with the victim and or possibly the children. So sometimes, the families, they don't want to split up. They're like, wait, I can't talk to him.
And even then, how do you enforce something like that?
I mean,
Brooklyn is everybody's. The way that Brooklyn is set up is everybody's on top of each other, and the communities are so close knit. You have a family, you have a person living in Brooklyn. They never been outside of a 7-block radius. In some instances, especially if you have the victim who is in a in the passive role in the relationship. You're home, your partner is working, you've never been outside of a 7-block radius. How do you enforce something like that? How can you force a person to go, you can't? So I can see how that could be extremely difficult.
It could be difficult, but you know what? If you don't abide by the rules, you will be arrested again for criminal contempt. And it can, depending on how you violate that order of protection, could end up being bumped up to a felony, and you're in prison for God knows how many years. And it's not that difficult to prove a contempt of an order of protection, because you showed up, somebody either saw you there, the police either caught you there, their phone records, depending on how. So that is not a difficult charge to prove. And so that's usually what deters some people. I've had many cases, though, that, there was always some sort of violation. Because the thing is this, for people, I guess, out there who might find themselves in these situations, even if the victim initiates the contact with you and you have that call with them or whatever the case is, that's a violation of the order of protection. It's not that you have to be, like, if they call you up to say, hey, you need to hang up that phone right quick, If you engage
Hmm.
in a conversation with them, that's a violation of the order of protection. And the victim can then, or somebody can then, be like, listen, so and so violated the order of protection because they were engaging in a phone call with so and so. So it's not the easiest thing, obviously, but I mean, it's if you violate the order of protection, then you're going to be arrested again. I mean, you can't take the chance. Some people try to take the chance, like, well, if the police don't pop up, like, who's gonna know? But there have been people who got stopped. I had one case where the couple was in violation of the order of protection. I guess she forgave him. They were driving. The police stopped the car due to like a tail light or something, asked for license
Wow.
registration, and found out that and that's how the police found them to be or him to be in contempt of the order of protection. He got arrested. Even if she didn't want that to
Wow.
happen, he got arrested and had a new charge on him.
And that charge is completely separate from
It's a separate charge, yeah. It's a new, yeah.
And regardless of if she is a cooperating witness or anything else, that's still a charge that he's going to have to now deal with. That it all sounds extremely difficult. Of all of them, in your experience, though, what do you feel was the most difficult to kind of deal with and to litigate?
I mean, I would say the cases that are the hardest to deal with are the ones where you are straight up looking at a victim who's been like her lights have been punched out of her. Like, I've had victims come in with like the big Mary J, Blige glasses, their whole face is like swollen. And you're looking at them and you're just like first you're taking it in, right? Because you're seeing, one of your sisters, right? In a sense, in this condition. And then, you're trying to get the facts, and the victim is doing the best that they can to not give you the facts and to tell you, oh, they got me from behind, I don't know who it was. When you heard the 911 tape, you have witness statements saying what took place, but there's still, so for me, it was draining, because it's like, you're seeing this person as a human, and that there's so much more, for this person's life, and you're seeing them, beat down, tore down, and just, when they talk about battered woman syndrome, somebody who's just been back and forth, back and forth, back and forth in the same situation. It does get kind of like when you're pleading in a sense with them to say, listen, you can move forward with this case. Like, we can get justice for you. And they're like, yeah, I don't know. Like, I prefer not to. That gets really, really hard. I mean, some people will say the most heinous crimes, that probably gets them. But for me, those were the ones where you literally, yeah, because you're pleading with them, and
in the bottom
you're
of the
not.
stomach, you feel that. So
Yeah. Yeah.
no. And honestly, in my experience, that tends to be the victims who feel like there's nowhere for them to turn. They have no help. There's nowhere that they can go. They can't get away from this person. They may have tried to leave, and the reason that they were getting beat was the fact that they tried to leave. Now, what are some of the ways that victims can seek help? What are some of the avenues that they can take? I know you said an order, pressing charges, the order of protection, but that is one of many steps, I'm assuming, that a victim can take to um, get herself or get themselves out of the situation.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there are a variety of steps that, someone can take in a sense to get there, like when they're ready to get out the situation, because just because you're in a domestic violence situation doesn't mean you're actually ready to exit, right? Which is why we find people who are in these situations, for, a number of years even, and you have people wondering, well, why couldn't they just leave? It's not so easy, because part of with the domestic violence that goes on is that there's a manipulation and belittling that takes place. So even with the victims who come in and you're pleading with them, it's not even the fact that they resources haven't worked for them in the past. It's because they've been manipulated and belittled so much, where they almost believe that this is what they actually deserve. or
Wow.
this is just what it is. So they're not even looking for help in some cases.
That's
They're
true.
just like, this is just my life, and I'm going to go back to it. But with respect to resources, when victims would, when the arrest would be made and the victim would be reached out, to by a victim service, because with a lot of the DA's office, they partner, I think all of them maybe, well, at least with Brooklyn, we partner with the Family Justice Center, and we have Safe Horizons and different programs like that. So when the victim is contacted, they are not just contacted by the prosecutor to say, hey, do you want to, I need you to come in and either let us know whether you want to move forward or not, but they are contacted by a victim service individual or specialist, who then, their goal is not necessarily the prosecutor's goal, right? They're there to actually just figure out how to provide services to the victim. So a victim could essentially get services from these social workers and specialists, and not actually move forward with pressing charges with against the defendant. And with those services, it can be shelter services, it could be maybe programs. They can maybe work with them to create a safety plan, so that even if they don't get out this time, but they can make way to get out in the future. So that's what happens as well. There's a lot of community grassroots organizations within our community that cater to domestic violence, victims, survivors, and whatnot. So there's that too. Even some of the churches, have established programs that help, domestic violence, again, survivors and victims. So there are many different ways, but I find that ways that I'm more so familiar with outside of like social work is really when they come in through the arrest, right? And even if they don't want to move forward, we still are an integral part of them receiving services and assisting them with with moving forward in their situation.
Okay. Now, as as I know, in your experience, you were working with the DA's office. What are some of the steps that you took? I know you were explaining there some of the services that they had access to through either the DA's office or after the report has been made. What does the process look like as an attorney going through the case? Or
Okay.
what kind of discovery do you need to do? How much of the evidence can you use? How much witness testimony are you using, if you have any? How does that typically work on a case?
Yeah, so I can give you a general overview of what happens, I guess, from arrest to, conviction or plea or dismissal, right? So like I said before, a typical scenario would be, there's a domestic violence dispute or something going on in a home or in the street or somewhere, right? And either the victim themselves calls 911, or a nearby person calls 911, or maybe the defendant even turned themselves in after. We've had those situations too, where there was some sort of dispute, and then the next day, for whatever reason, the defendant turned themselves in and we got wind of it. A criminal court complaint is made, based on the initial investigation that's done by, the police officers, obviously, who were at the scene. The complaint room prosecutors reach out to or whoever's handling the case from its onset, because some jurisdictions have a vertical prosecution. So whoever handles the case from the onset.
Sorry to interrupt, Rita. Vertical prosecution. How does that differ from normal prosecution?
Well, so what happened when I started off in the Domestic Violence Bureau is that there were different stages, right? So the case would come in through the complaint room, and so there would be a complaint room ADA who would write up the actual case. And then, so basically the case would be touched by different people before it got to the individual who was actually going to be, handling the case and trying the case and whatnot. With the vertical prosecution, you basically handle the case from the onset. you get the case from the beginning and you see it through. There's not 5 different ADAs who's touching your case. There's not 5 different steps going on. You handle the case from start to finish.
In your experience, does that help does that help in the process? Does that not to say that the ADAs don't necessarily care about the cases that they deal with, but does that help to kind of connect with the cases more when you have the vertical process where you're there and doing the work from the inception of the process? Or do you feel like one person takes the report and hands it off is a better situation to be in?
I think it depends on maybe the case. I think for the most part, there are definite benefits of a vertical prosecution, even for the prosecutor, because that's something that you worked on from like, that's your case from start to finish. So you know the case in and out in a way that might, I don't want to say differently, because I felt like even when we were handed off cases, it's your job to know your case regardless. If you have to reach out to whoever wrote it up, then you reach out to whoever wrote it up to get, the information. So I don't necessarily think that necessarily hindered or made it worse. I think in terms of for the victims or for witnesses, it makes it easier because they're speaking to one individual. You don't have 3 different people calling you to get maybe the same story because it's been handed off either so many times. So I think it's for efficiency's sake, it's a better process. I don't necessarily think that, what was happening before was just so horrible and it was to the detriment of the case or that it took away from the case. I just think that in terms of efficiency and accountability, maybe it's a better system. But either way, to go back to the process, the complaint would be drafted. The complaint is the accusatory instrument that is used to accuse, the defendant, which states the facts, and then it lists the charges. So the defendant knows what they're being charged with, and then the basic facts to support those charges. So once that's, drafted and whatnot, it's the defendant now goes to arraignment. And at arraignment, they are either going to, either set bail, not set bail. It really depends. But, there's a lot of things that go into, setting bail on an individual. When it comes to special victims cases, a lot of times bail is set. But I know that there's been a lot of bail reform, so things are a little different now. Not as, I guess, stringent in a sense with the bail. But to fast forward from that, the victim then is contacted by, again, sometimes they're contacted by victim services first, sometimes they're contacted by, the zone or prosecutor or the prosecutor who's handling the case to basically get the facts. You bring them in to basically get the facts. And at that point too, if there's new information that comes up that maybe the officers didn't know, or if there was an incident that took place a week prior that was not actually reported, that can also be reported at that time as well too, and added to the criminal court complaint, right? So now at this point, you go over the complaint, you go over the story with the victim. You've called, all your witnesses. You look at whatever evidences may be available. The victim may or may not be cooperative at that time. If they're not cooperative, they're like, listen, I don't want nothing to do with this case. I don't want him to go to jail. I don't want nothing to happen. They'll sign a waiver of prosecution, and that lets us know that they don't want to move forward. But that waiver of prosecution does not stop the case from moving forward if there is evidence to move forward. And so evidence can be the 911 call, depending on what was said. It can be witnesses. It can be pictures, right? If the victim comes in with black and blue eyes, those pictures are usually taken by the police officers that arrive on scene. At the time that the police officers were making the report, there's something called a domestic incident report that is completed, and the victim could handwrite it themselves to say what took place. And based on what they said in the domestic violence incident report, that in and of itself could be used as well too. So those are the types of evidences for the most part that we will have: pictures, 911, witness testimony, things of that nature. So now in assessing whether or not to move forward, the conversations that we have with the victim are very important, because a lot of people think that we were just trying to lock people up and put them in jail. And that's not the case, right? At least for most people. I can't speak to everybody, but for most people. We speak to the victim to find out what else is going on. A lot of times we find out that there is maybe a history of drug abuse, or there is some sort of, if the defendant never had a criminal history before, or if these incidences have not been, that common. Maybe they need a batterers intervention program. Maybe we discovered that there's some mental illness going on, some unchecked mental illness. So with our bureau, at least, we were really big on programs. So a lot of times when we were offering a plea deal, it had a program attached to it. So it can be a batterers intervention program, which can range from, several weeks to several months, depending. It can be a drug and alcohol program, which can be from, again, 9 months to a year. And, depending on if the defendant was successful in those programs, they would end up pleading to a lesser charge. So if they were pleading to an A misdemeanor, which is, punishable for up to 1 year in jail, they could end up coming back upon completion of the program with a violation, which is not a crime, which would not affect them in terms of jobs and things of that nature. So it's a very involved process. When people think about it, they just think about it like, oh, people just come in, they do this. It's a very involved process, which is why the prosecutors were always burnt out, because again, we're wearing the hat of social worker, we're investigating the cases, we're a support system for the victims. But, there's, so upon, finally, I guess, curating a package, as I would call it, in a sense, if it, depending on what took place, if it warranted jail time, that would be the offer. If it warranted a program, that would be the offer. And it's up to the defendant, when the case went to court, whether or not they wanted to accept the offer or not. If they do not, we cannot force anybody to take an offer. If they do not want the program and want to go to trial instead, then that's what would happen. Or if they want, so at that point, it was up to them. Their attorney could advise them, but it's up to the defendant to decide what they want to do. And at that point, the case either goes to trial. The disposition of a case is this: the case is either going to go to trial, the defendant's either going to take a plea, or the case is going to get dismissed, either due to lack of evidence to prove, or we ran out of time, because there's a statutory time limit that we have to do these cases. We either ran out of time, or we didn't have enough, evidence, or something else, some other situation came up in which called for the dismissal of the case.
So there is a statute of limitation on domestic violence complaints?
Well, all cases have a statute of limitations. Some cases have, prosecutors might have 180 days to prove a case. Some might have 90 days to prove a case. Some might have 60 days. It all depends on the actual, the kind of case that was presented, the crime that was committed.
Wow. So, okay, that wasn't something that I was aware of. I thought that, you can come back, a year later and say, hey, listen, this guy beat me up, or.
Well, there's a statute. Well, that's different from the statute of limitations in terms of presenting the case. So once the prosecutor has it, there's time limits on how long we have to prove the case. In terms of bringing forth the case, there are statute of limitations on how long you have to bring forth the case. I do not remember how long you have in New York to bring forth a complaint. It might, I don't know why 2 years is in my mind. I could totally be wrong. But there is, you don't have forever to bring forth the case. There is a time period that you have to bring forth cases in general. But in terms of the prosecutor who is handling the case, there is a statutory limit, based on the degree of the case, or the class of the case, how long you have to prove how long you have to actually, make your case. There are some cases that could have been good cases, but because of squandered time, case ended up having to be dismissed. And that's what it is.
Yeah. According to the internet. Governor Cuomo signed Law S 2416/A, and the statute of limitation is 2 years.
Okay, so yeah. Yeah, I was like, 2 years was in my head, but I couldn't 100. But they change these things all the time. So
look at you, just lawing away. Got the laws in the back of your head. So we wanted to kind of move into some questions in the next few minutes. So if anyone has any questions for Rita surrounding this topic or the legal ramifications or whatever else, please ask away. We have one already from Naisa. And she says, can you explain what the domestic violence green card is? Is this an option that is still available for people? And have you seen people take advantage of this? Earlier you mentioned spousal ceasing documents, but if they're trying to apply, what sort of assistance is available for them to get it?
Okay. So there's not a domestic violence green card per se. There's something called the U visa, right? So if you are a victim of a crime, it doesn't just have to be domestic violence. There's a list of eligible crimes, and I can't remember what all of them are, but there's a list of eligible crimes, domestic violence being one of them, that would make a victim eligible for a U visa. So with the Family Justice Center, as I had stated before, when the victim comes in and they're wanting to be an active participant in the prosecution. So you have to want to move forward with the case to be eligible to get this U visa as well too. We had the Family Justice Center had the attorneys on their end, or they had the specialists on their end to assist with the applying of the U visa. And so with the U visa, you have I think it allows you 4 years to be in the country. Now, while you are on the U visa, I believe after 3 years, you can apply for your green card. And then when you get your green card, after 5 years of having your green card, you can then apply for citizenship. So that's really important to know, because we have a lot of people in our communities that are victims of crimes that are undocumented, that are eligible, depending on the crime, for a U visa. And so it's important that, people, I understand some people, they're shy, they're afraid, but if you're undocumented, this U visa is here to give you, green card, citizenship in the United States.
And some solace as a victim of a crime.
Yeah. So, I think that needs to be made known more so in our community, that, there is, one, you don't have to be afraid just because you're undocumented to bring forth a case. But if you are a victim, you can apply for a U visa that will give you legal status in this country. So that's really important. But it's not called a domestic violence green card. It's a U visa.
Okay. Now on this topic, we're the Haitian American Caucus. It's only right that we speak to this specifically within our community. I know from personal experience, I've seen friends, parents, I've seen friends be batterers, and I've seen friends be victims. Speak to me about some of your experiences surrounding this within our community.
Well, interestingly enough, myself and my former colleague, Marley, I shout her out all the time. Marley Marcellus, she's an amazing attorney. She was my partner. We were office mates at the DA's office. And because we were both Haitian and we both spoke Creole, we were given all the Haitian Creole cases. Primarily out of the 6-7, that East Flatbush.
So you were in the thick of it.
Yes, we were in and let me tell you, the cases that I saw, voodoo was involved. Like there was I had one case I remember where the officer even was like, I've never seen anything like this before. The officer showed up to the scene. There was a 911 call. Funny enough, I think it was the husband that actually called, but the wife was screaming. You could hear her in the background. And it was apparently the wife found out that the husband had a girlfriend and an 8-year-old child in Haiti. The husband, though, called 911 saying that his wife is threatening to kill him with the voodoo. and that there are white plates under the bed with candles. So when the police officers arrived, they found the white plate under the bed with candles. And I'm listening to the 911 operator say, "Are you saying she's trying to kill you with voodoo?" Like, it was just so crazy to them. But apparently this was, this was a domestic violence dispute that needed to be addressed. So we've seen that. I remember Marley had a case where I think we worked on it together, where the husband and wife were in church. They were both Catholic. They were both on their knees praying, and the husband just, bam, while in the middle of the service, punched his wife out. And when the police so first of all, the priest did not call 911 or get involved. It was somebody like way in the back. The elders didn't get involved. Nobody wanted to get involved. And so when the police arrived, they asked him, "Why did you punch her?" And he said she was praying too long. So domestic violence is very prominent in our community, but I will say 99.99% of the time when I spoke to these victims, they did not want to press charges because, one, they they needed the man to be in the house, right? Because most of these cases, all the Haitian cases I had were always the women was the victim. They needed their husband to be in the house. Some of them were undocumented or were on the green card, and they were afraid of what could happen if the husband then comes home and and finds all this stuff, and next thing you know, she's back on the next ship, to Haiti or whatever, right? So there's a lot of concern there. I remember I had one victim who was like, "Well, I only called 911 because me and my husband were getting in an argument, and I had a friend from church who said that in America, if your husband talks down to you, you could just call the police and then they'll make him stop." She didn't understand that when he called the police, that the police are not there to be therapists and social workers. They're there to find criminality and to make arrests. And that's what happened.
Now, you said a lot in that just now. And for one, we have a question here that says, have you ever had a man come in to report a woman for domestically violating him? And did your office take him seriously? Which is one thing. Then there is the priest who decided not to report, which is a completely different thing, because in my understanding, priests are mandatory reporters, which is a conversation that I would like to go in at some point shortly. So to go back to kind of Sam's question, and have you ever had a man come to you, or how have you used your cultural competency and the training that you've received to kind of dispel the myth that women can't abuse men, and how do you deal with that in the process, as far as making sure that men's complaints are taken seriously?
Okay. I've had several men make reports of domestic violence. Some of them were from the LGBTQAI, community. And then there were some that were straight heterosexual, males. We took the cases because we are not allowed to, cast judgment or discriminate or anything like that. Like, oh, you're a man, whatever. I'm not going to say that people did not have questions like, did this, like this, when you hear the story and you're like, you have to be kidding me. Is this really what took place? Some of the cases that I had, I think I only had one case that might have been serious with the guy because the girl was like, I guess, legit crazy. But the one case that I remember, people were just like, is this some sort of like retaliation? Like, is he trying, like there was some sort of motive in a sense behind him coming to make the report. It wasn't as if he was an actual victim. It was like he came in to either retaliate or get back from something else that might have happened. But in any respect, we've had several cases from men. Not as many, though. I will say that, not as many cases come in, and the majority of the male cases that did come in were from individuals from the LGBTQAI community. But we investigated the cases the same. We would prosecute the case the same. We didn't give less emphasis because it was a man, because a crime is a crime.
Okay. And then speaking to the mandatory reporter situation and the priest and the actual abuse taking place in a public forum, we have Naisa who asks, so when you mix culture and bystanders in those events, what is your message to those who remain idle?
I mean, my thing is this: if it was your sister, would you want somebody to step in and make a call? Like, that's how you have to look at it.
1000%.
We're a society where, especially in New York, I mean, we see things and we walk over the body. Like, we got places to go. We don't have time for this, right? That's our culture. And we don't want to get involved because there have been situations where people have gotten involved and have gotten seriously hurt for their involvement, because we don't know who these people are, right, that we're stepping in for. But a 911 call is not going to kill anybody. It's not going to hurt anybody. If you see somebody that is being, hurt, like I had a lot of my cases where they were public cases. I mean, I had one guy that was his MO. He had 3 cases in the years that I was there, back to back, with 3 different women. All of them were punching out and harassing women in the streets. Like, he liked an audience, right? So for me, I'm like, if it was my brother, if it was my sister, my cousin, my family member, I would have want somebody to call 911, because that 911 call could be what makes or breaks the case. If that person if my cousin didn't want to move forward for whatever reason. So I don't think people should stay idle. You should obviously stay safe, but if you go and call 911 with respect to what you saw, sometimes, people don't give their name. They're like, listen, I don't really want to give my name. Doesn't mean we can't find you. We'll track your call and call you. But at the end of the day, though, it's important that people, when you see something, you say something, because it could easily be your mother or your sister in the street getting attacked, and you wouldn't want that person to get away when there was a whole village of people watching.
1000%. And I think that it's important that we overstate the fact. We want you to say something, but we also want you to stay safe.
Yeah.
So even if you gotta go into a store and call and give a description and not say anything at all, if you feel like if that's the safest way for you to make sure that people are safe, if you feel like you can intervene.
I'm not saying intervene. I'm not saying go throw bulls.
No.
Or,
And when I say intervene, I've seen even things like, hey, somebody just called the cops. You need to leave. And then going to get the victim and bringing her to a safe space.
Yeah.
That's intervening for me. I'm not, I don't live the violent lifestyle. So it's not, but that's definitely one of those things where we want to just be mindful that staying safe is the most important aspect of it all. I think we want to wrap up. We thank everybody for joining us. Rita, thank you so much. Please let everybody know where they can reach you.
Ooh, okay. So you can follow me at my personal IG. I'm more of an IG person. I am Rita Pierre. So Rita spelled on the screen with an H. You can follow me at Frida's World, which is the podcast that I have that is for professional women of color, FREEDAS_world. Or you can follow me at According to RP, which is my podcast/radio show that talks about all things Black community, particularly these current events. So that's According to RP. And that's how you could find me on Instagram. And you can Google that or put that into Facebook. You'll find me there too, if that's your preferred place to, communicate.
Rita, thank you so much. We really appreciate the time that you spent with us tonight. We
hope
that everybody who joined the call or joined the program got something, took something, and can actively use this information to intervene in times that you need to intervene, to report when it's time to report, and as a victim to know that there are resources for you, and that it's okay to get out of the situation that you're in. We would also like to thank our sponsors for this evening. FDC, we have the August Project, and obviously HAC. And we will be continuing these programs. We have a music and domestic violence program coming up. So thank you and have a great night.